Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm joined by Chris from Warcradle Studios to
Hello.
get into the weeds and talk a bit about the design of Armoured Clash and where it's coming from and possibly where it's going to as well. Moving from sea and air to land, was there any sort of onus on you to keep it as close as you could to Dystopian Wars, or to have the flavour but without it being just a sort of broad strokes, or how have you approached it?
It is a game in a very different scale. It's a 10mm scale rather than essentially a 1mm scale, which is Dystopian Wars, a 1 to 1200. What we found was the scale that Dystopian Wars is for sea units, for vessels on the open waves, is very different to the land-based game. And in order for the two to exist in the same or on the same table, it would mean that the tanks and the infantry would be simply tokens, and the tanks would have to be enormous machines of war, rolling around on the land, which to us didn't feel right. So that's why we decided to change it to a 10mm game. It allows us to get infantry onto the table for a start, which I think is really important for this type of game, especially in this age. But it allows us to make the miniatures their own. So while there are design cues from the factions in Dystopian Wars, and they are all the same factions, the same 8 factions you'll find in Dystopian Wars will be in Armoured Clash. The look and feel of each faction will be familiar to players of Dystopian Wars, or anyone that's familiar with the Dystopian Age as a general. You'll have a very distinct style to each of the factions. Like I say, people will recognize that they are from a particular faction.
I think we can see there the huge green glazed tiles that are very distinctive on the Empire. And we've seen on some of their flying fortresses, and also on the bridges of some of the destroyers recreated on this massive land ship as well.
Absolutely. So, that distinctive style for the Empire, which you can recognize very easily as being similar to some of the ships that exist in Dystopian Wars, is on the Lao Shan, which is the land ship for the Empire.
Now, you were mentioning there infantry, of which we have a few to look at. How's the concepting gone for that?
It's been great fun. I mean, it's a challenge involved in making every unit different, even though a rifleman is a rifleman is a rifleman, but there are definite flavors for each of the factions, for each of those units. Some of them might have different numbers of models in them. Some of them might use slightly different weapons. Some are shorter range but more effective. Others are more defensive, as you can see with the Green Banner troops for the Empire. Not only do they have shields, but their weapons are slightly shorter range as well. So they are more defensive than, say, the Crown Riflemen, which are the 2 factions that you'll get in the starter set. And that will give you different play styles, different ways to use those infantry on the table. I
mean, with the Empire troops here, seeing things like automata in the style of a terracotta warrior makes perfect sense across the board, because they obviously lean very heavily into very artisanal automata, if that's the right way to put it. There's a lot of time and effort putting form into their function for the Empire.
Loving craft.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that comes across really nicely there as well.
Yeah, and there are 2 elements to designing the units for any game. One of them is the look and feel of the faction, to make sure that they retain the integrity that we establish for each faction, and have a very thematic feel within those individual factions. So the Empire troops feel like Empire troops, but also making the rules for them different, so that they're very interesting to play, that each faction has different things to bring to the table. So you're not just playing reskinned versions of the same armies against each other. That's kind of the challenge of putting this all together.
With the likes of something as small as 10mm figures, then the core set is going to have sprues that contains a lot of infantry types along with some of the vehicles, walkers, that sort of thing. How prescriptive or restrictive was it in designing at 10mm? Because you don't want to be dealing with a lot of fiddly parts, certainly not on infantry. Was that more of a challenge to get those onto a sprue without looking too static and too repetitive, or was it just a case of going, well, here are the restrictions and we can work quite broadly within that?
I will put people's mind at rest now. There are no multi-part 10mm infantry.
Good man.
So everything is all the infantry are single cast, and that, you're right, that does present a challenge for sculpting and production, because the poses are then very limited. You can't have, I mean, it's actually quite difficult to have a rifleman, aiming his rifle, because of the way that the drafting works, and any voids and undercuts that you might have between the arms, for example. But we have a really creative team of sculptors. We have a very creative art director, and the rest of the team, Stuart and myself, get involved in giving tips on getting those sculpts and those poses just right. I think we've managed to get some really nice looking miniatures, and I think everyone will be pleasantly surprised with them.
There's been some interesting ones have been popping up as the release date approaches, where we're seeing more of the teasers coming through and concept and design. The likes of this.
These are walkers. They're on bases, so they act like infantry in a number of different ways, especially when you're shooting at them. But they will have a higher armor and more defense capability than your regular troopers, and will be a halfway house between a tank and an infantryman.
These are also going to be coming in plastic then?
And they're plastic, and there are different variants, so you can see different guns. There's one version that's got a close combat weapon and a light gun, and another version with a heavy gun and a shield generator that allows it to soak up some incoming firepower. And these are multi-part models as well, so you have to put the legs together and you have to put the guy on the body, but they're nicely done, so they are a joy to put together.
Which is a very important thing, especially working in a scale like this, which may be a brand new scale for a lot of people, because I imagine some Dystopian Wars players will come across and be familiar with the concept of grand army fighting on the tabletop, but you may get a lot of people coming in and thinking, well, this is unique, different. The Dystopian Age is sort of a steampunk 1870s, so you don't want to be in a position where people are put off or there's too much trepidation about working in a smaller scale. And having one-piece models is obviously great, but then when you're designing the larger kits, how much sort of build is in something like the vehicles, and how did you go about those? Because we've seen quite a lot for cruisers. I imagine we'll be seeing something similar for the armored fighting vehicles for the sort of main lines.
Yeah, and they're very similar across the two games. Tanks, the heavy tanks or the mainline tanks for each faction are not dissimilar in size to a destroyer, maybe a bit bigger than that. The land ships are slightly bigger than a battleship, and they are resin. They will come as a main body with some bits that you need to attach. So they're super easy to build and very nice quality resin as well. And the plastic kits are in as few pieces as we are able to build them in. So one of the main things that we approach in any build or any design is how easy it is to put together. So we try and keep things in as fewer parts as possible. That allows us to fit more into the frame, because if you have models split down to too many parts, then of course that takes up a lot more room on a sprue. So you get less units on there, and we like to ensure that we're giving people as much on each sprue as we can, so that the value for money in the product is as high as it possibly can, and also so that people can fill more units on the table with every purchase they make.
Did you run into any sort of challenges then with the design?
It's definitely a challenge, but like any creative process, it's a case of trying out what works, seeing what's good, doing a lot of 3D prints, a lot of 3D printed assemblies, and making sure that every step of the way we're testing, fitting, and looking at the pieces and ensuring that not only the quality of each piece and the detail is there, but also that the things fit together nicely and the connection points are good and solid, and that there is a specific build for the customer that allows them to put it together quite easily. As you can see, there are some really nice details, very clean and crisp on the plastic sprues, and we're really happy with the way the miniatures have come out, and I hope everyone agrees.
Oh, it looks absolutely fantastic. When you're producing something like this, so it's not being physically sculpted, but then you're printing out sections as prototypes in 3D, is that just to check fits and the like before you split it down to the sprue? For people who aren't aware, the hard plastic sort of styrene sprues are huge steel dies that are grooved out. They're carved out. So I imagine you want to make sure that the fit is exact before that tooling gets done. But it's difficult for me to get my head around how you go from something on a screen that you can spin around in virtual space to a prototype that will still work when it's in its component parts on a. Do you ever get to the point where every component is 3D printed and then assembled, or is it also? So you do go that far?
Yeah, so we will do what's called a merged print, first of all, what we call a merged print, which is the model all put together, and we'll then use that to put it side by side with other models that we've already created so that we have a benchmark. And so a medium tank feels like a medium tank across all the different factions, and they're similar in size.
Yeah.
Because you don't want something that's meant to be the same class as something else being significantly bigger or smaller, because you're not going to get that immediate recognition of what it is on the table and its impacts and scale and what it does.
Silhouettes are important.
So exactly. Yeah. So that's the first thing. And then once we're happy with that and we're happy with the way things have been split up, we'll do a complete breakdown print. And we'll build those and make sure they fit. Now, of course, the 3D print plastic is different to the end result high intensity plastic that we get. High impact plastic. So we do our very best to ensure that the fits are fine. You do get some difference between the 3D prints and the final product, but the tolerance is such that they shouldn't be too much of an issue. And if they are, then there are things that we can do to tweak them when the final product is produced, if we're not happy with the result, to make sure that we're giving the customers the best product we can.
It's absolutely fascinating. Being slightly older than some of the viewers probably, I remember seeing the old pantographing being done from a 3-in-1 down, and they were literally drawing over the model again with a tool, and at the same time an arm is attached that would then rotering out a big block. But seeing how component parts can be designed, printed, test fitted, and then tweaked all before it needs to go to that final physical production is it's like space magic.
It is. I'm very glad that we live in a world where we're able to do that, because it makes everyone's jobs a lot easier, and it allows us to create much nicer miniatures.
Yeah. Oh, they do absolutely knock it out of the park. Are there any models then that have come from the likes of Dystopian Wars, maybe things like the flyers, the SRS tokens that we would have seen in that could be realized in 10mm on a much grander scale? And is there anything from Dystopian Wars that maybe you'd like to see come across and see writ large in 10 for Armoured Clash?
It's incredibly difficult because of the huge gulf between the two scales to get anything from Dystopian Wars into Armoured Clash. You're right. You've hit the nail on the head, though, Gerry. The SRS tokens, so the planes that are on there, are the same planes that exist in the Dystopian Age. So yes, there'll be some recognizable assets that follow between the two. But apart from that, it is incredibly difficult, because anything that's bigger than that, and planes that are tiny on on the tokens for Dystopian Wars, as miniatures are quite big on Armoured Clash scale. So anything bigger than an aircraft is going to be enormous on the table. Maybe we'll do a big diorama with a fight in a port, and you'll have a frigate on one side of the table, but again, that would be 6 or 7 feet long in Armoured Clash.
At that point, it becomes the table. But speaking of terrain, you've already done some very modular terrain that's sort of ubiquitous. It will form a whole variety of buildings depending on what way you want to construct it, and it's not tied to any specific nation. It's industrialized dystopian age, I suppose, is a good way of putting it. Are there plans to extend that terrain range further, or even do faction specific bits and pieces in the future?
There's loads of ideas that we've got for terrain. It's a priority though for us to bring out something that isn't available on the market. So having that kind of industrial terrain for Armoured Clash is quite important, where there's a lot of historical things that could be used from that period, or from an associated period. You could have churches and villages and other buildings from that Victorian era that will work quite nicely on the tabletop. But then also you have this very industrial, higher technology type of building that exists, that we've produced, which allows you to mix it up a little bit. So you could have this very quaint English village, but then you could have a very industrial plant the other side of the table, and that gives you a real good contrast between the two worlds for which to fight your battles. A setting like Dystopian Age allows people to really let their imaginations run wild, and they can take some historical terrain pieces and go crazy with it.
It's been fascinating talking with you, Chris, about the concepting and design getting to this point. Before I let you go, though, I couldn't run off without talking about what's coming in the future. So obviously Armoured Clash has been worked on for a while now, and you've been developing the main factions for the release, the Crown and the Empire. But sort of how far ahead are you looking at the other factions? Because there will be current Dystopian Wars players who are going, well, I play X and I want to play X on land as well.
We have an aggressive release schedule to ensure that we have all the factions out in as quick a time as possible, while still releasing products for Dystopian Wars. We've nailed down pretty much 6 of the 8 factions already, with the other 2 being sketches of what the units are going to be and what they're going to look like. So that gives us the first 2, which are Crown and Empire, then the Union and Enlightened, then the Imperium and the Commonwealth will follow after that, finishing up with the Sultanate and Alliance, I think. And that's how the running order is going to be.
It's absolutely fascinating. I love seeing the concepting early on, and the concept artwork for these is absolutely stonking. And I know people will just be looking at that going, oh, well, I want those in, 32, 35 mil. Well, it's actually
people are already saying that, Gerry. Yeah.
It was always going to happen, really. Let's face it. The Squire in particular, it just screams Teutonic Cylon to me. Steampunk Teutonic Cylon, and I am 100% on board for that. Hopefully that's given you a good idea of what it takes to get a faction onto the tabletop. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below. We'll pass them across to Chris and the guys at Warcradle Studios, and keep your eyes peeled for more coming in the next weeks and months for Armoured Clash as well. Thank you very much, Chris.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.